Welcome to the appendix, where we read the primary sources of the past so that the present can be better understood. Today's primary source, Commercial Warfare, 1806 to 1810. The Peace of Amiens was of short duration, and in 1803 came a renewal of the European wars, which soon involved the commerce of the United States. In 1805, Great Britain seized and condemned the vessel Essex, engaged in trade with the French West Indies. A year later, Monroe reported that over 120 American vessels had been seized by the British. These depredations on neutral commerce were aggravated by the British practice of impressment. Protests proving vain, Congress on April 18, 1806, passed a non-importation act excluding many articles from importation from Great Britain. April 8th, the so-called Fox Blockade was established around the mouths of the Elbe, Weser, Trave, etc. And May 16th, this blockade was extended to include all the coasts from the Elbe to Brest. Napoleon retaliated with the Milan Decree of November 21, 1806. Great Britain replied with the Order in Council of January 7, 1807, prohibiting any vessel from trading with any port of France or her allies, and the Additional Order in Council of November 11, blockading all ports in Europe from which the British flag was excluded. Napoleon retaliated with the Milan Decree, December 17th, declaring the British Isles in a state of blockade, and that every ship searched by the British was to be regarded as enemy property. These decrees and counter-decrees not only bore severely upon American commerce, they also touched American pride and honor. The effort of William Pinkney to conclude a satisfactory treaty with Great Britain having failed, the United States established December 22, 1807, an embargo. The Embargo Act of December 22 was supplemented by acts of January 9, 1808, and March 12, 1808. The embargo, which Jefferson fondly believed would bring the warring powers to term, proved unenforceable, and it was withdrawn March 1, 1809, in favor of another non-intercourse law. Section 11 of this act permitted the President by proclamation to reopen trade with Great Britain or France if either of those nations ceased to violate American rights. The British Prime Minister Erskine, having given assurances that the odious orders in council would be withdrawn, President Madison, by proclamation of April 19, 1809, permitted trade with Great Britain. The action of Erskine was disavowed by the British government, however, and President Madison was forced, August 9th, to revoke the earlier proclamation and declare the Non-Intercourse Act in force. This act, however, expired in 1810, and Nathaniel Macon, chairman of the Foreign Affairs Committee, introduced the bill known as Macon's Bill No. 2, which provided that in case either France or England should cease their violations of American commerce, the Non-Intercourse Act should be revived against the other. Meantime, by the Rambouillet Decree of March 23, 1810, Napoleon had ordered the seizure of all vessels in France, ports flying the flag of the United States. Despite this chicanery, Napoleon's assurances of August 5, 1810, that in response to the proffer of the Macon Bill, he would revoke all obnoxious decrees, was accepted in good faith. By proclamation of November 2nd, the President therefore withdrew restrictions on the commerce with France, and on March 2, 1811, Congress passed a new Intercourse Act, directed against Great Britain. Under the circumstances, English opinion demanded a revocation of the orders in council at the critical moment in May 1812. Prime Minister Perceval was assassinated, and the revocation did not actually take place until June 23rd, too late to avoid war. The literature on the commercial welfare of these years is extensive. Most of the documents of the controversy can be found in American State Papers, Foreign Relations, Volume 3. The Berlin Decree, November 21st, 1806. Article 1. The British Islands are declared in a state of blockade. 2. All commerce and correspondence with the British Isles are prohibited. In consequence, letters or packets addressed either to England, to an Englishman, or in the English language shall not pass through the post office and shall be seized. 3. Every subject of England, or whatever rank and condition soever, who shall be found in the countries occupied by our troops or by those of our allies, shall be made a prisoner of war. 4. All magazines, merchandise, or property whatsoever belonging to a subject of England shall be declared lawful prize. 5. The trade in English merchandise is forbidden. All merchandise belonging to England or coming from its manufacturers and colonies is declared lawful prize. 6. One half of the proceeds of the confiscation of the merchandise and property declared good prize by the preceding articles shall be applied to indemnify the merchants for the loss which they have suffered by the capture of merchant vessels by English cruisers. 7. No vessel coming directly from England or from the English colonies, or having been there since the publication of the present decree, shall be received into any port. 8. Every vessel contravening the above clause, by means of a false declaration, shall be seized, and the vessel and cargo confiscated, as if they were English property. 9. Our tribunal of prizes at Paris is charged with the definitive adjudication of all the controversies, which by the French army, relative to the execution of the present decree. Our tribunal of prizes at Milan shall be charged with the definitive adjudication of the said controversies, which may arise within the extent of our kingdom of Italy. 10. The present decree shall be communicated by our Minister of Exterior Relations to the kings of Spain, of Naples, of Holland, Eritrea, and to our allies, whose subjects, like ours, are the victims of the injustice and the barbarism of the English maritime laws. Our finances, our police, and our postmasters general are charged each in what concerns him with the execution of the present decree. British Orders in Council, January 7, 1807. Whereas the French government has issued certain orders which, in violation of the usage of war, purport to prohibit the commerce of all neutral nations with His Majesty's dominions, and also to prevent such nations from trading with any other country in any articles, the growth, produce, or manufacture of His Majesty's dominions, and whereas the said government has also taken upon itself to declare all His Majesty's dominions to be in a state of blockade at the time when the fleets of France and her allies are themselves confined within their own ports by their superior valor and discipline of the British Navy, and whereas such attempts on the part of the enemy would give to His Majesty an unquestionable right of retaliation, and would warrant His Majesty in enforcing the same prohibition of all commerce with France, with the power vainly hopes to effect against the commerce of His Majesty's subjects, a prohibition which the superiority of His Majesty's naval forces might enable him to support by actually investing the ports and coasts of the enemy with numerous squadrons and cruisers, so as to make the entrance or approach thereto manifestly dangerous, And whereas His Majesty, though unwilling to follow the example of his enemies by proceeding to an extremity so distressing to all nations not engaged in the war and carrying on their accustomed trade, yet feels himself bound by due regard to the just defense of the rights and interests of his people not to suffer such measures to be taken by the enemy without taking some steps on his part to restrain this violence and to retort upon them the evils of their own injustice. His Majesty is thereupon pleased by and with the advice of his privy council to order, and it is hereby ordered, that no vessel shall be permitted to trade from one port to another, both with ports shall belong to or be in the possession of France or her allies, or shall be so far under their control as the British vessels may not trade freely thereat, and the commanders of His Majesty's ships of war and privateers shall be and are hereby instructed to warn every neutral vessel coming from any such port and destined to another such port to discontinue her voyage and not to proceed to any such port. And any vessel, after being so warned, or any vessel coming from any such port, after a reasonable time, shall have been afforded for receiving information of His Majesty's order, which shall be found proceeding to another such port, shall be captured and brought in, and together with her cargo shall be condemned as lawful prize. And His Majesty's principal secretaries of state, the Lord of Commissioners of the Admiralty, and the judges of the High Court of Admiralty, and the courts of Vice Admiralty, are to take the necessary measures herein as to them shall respectively appertain. British Order in Council, November 11th, 1807. Whereas certain orders establishing an unprecedented system of warfare against this kingdom, and aimed especially at the destruction of its commerce and resources, were some time since issued by the government of France, by which the British islands were declared to be in a state of blockade, thereby subjecting to capture and condemnation all vessels with their cargoes which should continue to trade with His Majesty's dominions. And whereas by the same order all trading in English merchandise is prohibited, and every article of merchandise belonging to England or coming from her colonies or of her manufacture is declared lawful prize. And whereas the nations in alliance with France and under her control were required to give, and have given, and do give, effect to such orders. And whereas His Majesty's order of the 7th of January last has not answered the desired purpose either of compelling the enemy to recall those orders or of inducing neutral nations to interpose with effect to obtain their revocation, but, on the contrary, the same has been recently enforced with increased rigor. And whereas His Majesty, under these circumstances, finds himself compelled to take further measures for the asserting and vindicating his just rights, His Majesty is therefore pleased by and with the advice of his privy council to order, and it is hereby ordered, that all the ports and places of France and her allies, or of any country at war with His Majesty, and all other ports or places in Europe, from which, although not at war with His Majesty, the British flag is excluded, and all ports or places in the colonies belonging to His Majesty's enemies shall, from henceforth, be subject to the same restrictions in port of trade and navigation, with the exceptions hereafter mentioned, as if the same were actually blockaded by His Majesty's naval forces in the most strict and rigorous manner. And it is hereby further ordered and declared that all trade and articles which are the produce or manufacture of the said countries or colonies shall be deemed and considered to be unlawful, and every vessel trading from or to the said countries or colonies together with all goods and merchandise on board, and all articles of the produce or manufacture of the said countries or colonies shall be captured and condemned as prize to the captors. And the commanders of His Majesty's ship of war and privateers and other vessels acting under the Majesty's commission shall be and are hereby instructed to warn every vessel which shall have commenced her voyage prior to any notice of this order, and shall be destined to any port of France or of her allies, or of any other country at war with His Majesty, or to any port or place from which the British flag, as aforesaid, is excluded, or to any colony belonging to His Majesty's enemies, and which shall not have cleared out as hereinbefore allowed to discontinue her voyage and to proceed to some port or place in this kingdom, or to Gibraltar or Malta. And any vessel which, after having been so warned, or after a reasonable time, shall have been afforded for the arrival of information of this His Majesty's order at any port or place from which she sailed, or which, having notice of this order, shall be found in the prosecution of any voyage contrary to the restrictions contained in this order, shall be captured, and together with her cargo condemned as lawful prize to the captors. And whereas countries not engaged in the war have acquiesced in these orders of France prohibiting all trade in any articles, the produce or manufacture of His Majesty's dominions, and the merchants of those countries have given countenance and effect to those prohibitions by accepting from persons styling themselves commercial agents of the enemy, resident of neutral ports, certain documents, terms, certificates of origin, being certificates obtained at the ports of shipment, declaring that the articles of the cargo are not of the produce or manufacture of His Majesty's dominions, or to that effect. And whereas this expedient has been directed by France and submitted to by such merchants as part of the new system of warfare directed against the trade of this kingdom, and as the most effectual instrument of accomplishing the same, and is therefore essentially necessary to resist it. His Majesty is therefore pleased by and with the advice of His Privy Council to order, and it is hereby ordered, that if any vessel, after reasonable time, shall have been afforded for receiving notice of this His Majesty's order at the port or place from which such vessel shall have cleared off, shall be found carrying any such certificate or document referring to or authenticating the same, such vessel shall be adjudged lawful prize to the captor, together with the goods laden therein, belonging to the person or persons by whom or on whose behalf any such document was put on board. And the Right Honourable the Lords Commissioners of His Majesty's Treasury, His Majesty's Principal Secretary of State, the Lords Commissioners of the Admiralty, and the Judges of the High Court of Admiralty and Courts of Vice Admiralty are to take the necessary measures wherein as them shall respectively appertain. W. Falconer. The Milan Decree, December 17, 1807. Napoleon, Emperor of France, King of Italy, and Protector of the Rhenish Confederation, observing the measures adopted by the British government on the 11th November last, by which vessels belonging to neutral, friendly, or even powers the allies of England are made liable not only to be searched by English cruisers, but to be compulsorily detained in England, and to have a tax laid on them of so much per cent of the cargo, to be regulated by the British legislature, observing that those acts the British government denationalizes ships of every nation in Europe that is not competent for any government to detract from its own independence and rights, all the sovereigns of Europe having in trust the sovereignties and independence of the flag, that if any unpardonable weakness, and which in the eyes of posterity would be an indelible stain, if such a tyranny was allowed to be established into principles and consecrated by usage, the English would avail themselves of it to assert it as a right, and they have availed themselves of the tolerance of the government to establish the infamous principle that the flag of a nation does not cover goods, and to have to their right of blockade an arbitrary extension, and which infringes on the sovereignty of every state. We have decreed and do decree as follows. Article 1. Every ship, to whatever nation it may belong, that shall have submitted to be searched by an English ship, or to a voyage to England, or shall have paid any tax whatsoever to the English government, is thereby, and for that alone, declared to be denationalized, to have forfeited the protection of its king, and to have become English property. Article 2. Whether the ships thus denationalized by the arbitrary measures of the English government enter into our ports, or those of our allies, or whether they fall into the hands of our ships of war or of our privateers, they are declared to be good and lawful prize. Article 3. The British Islands are declared to be in a state of blockade, both by land and sea. Every ship of whatever nation, or whatsoever the nature of its cargo may be, that sails from the ports of England, or those of the English colonies, and of the countries occupied by English troops, and proceeding to England or to the English colonies, or to countries occupied by English troops, is good and lawful prize, as contrary to the present decree, and may be captured by our ships of war or our privateers, and adjudged to the captor. Article 4. These measures, which are resorted to only in just retaliation of the barbarous system adopted by England, which assimilates its legislation to that of the Algiers, shall cease to have any effect with respect to all nations who shall have the firmness to compel the English government to respect their flag. They shall continue to be rigorously enforced as long as that government does not return to the principle of the law of nation, which regulates the relations of civilized states in a state of war. The provisions of the present decree shall be abrogated and null, in fact, as soon as the English abide again by the principles of the law of nations, which are also the principles of justice and of honor. All of our ministers are charged with the execution of the present decree, which shall be inserted in the bulletin of the laws. Napoleon. The Embargo Act, December 22, 1807. Be it enacted that an embargo be and hereby is laid on all ships and vessels in the ports and places within the limits or jurisdiction of the United States, cleared or not cleared, bound to any foreign port or place, and that no clearance be furnished to any ship or vessel bound to such foreign port or place, except vessels under the immediate direction of the President of the United States, and that the President be authorized to give such instructions to the officers of the revenue and of the navy and revenue cutters of the United States, as shall appear best adopted for carrying the same into full effect, provided that nothing herein contained shall be construed to prevent the departure of any foreign ship or vessel, either in ballast or with the goods, wares, and merchandise on board of such foreign ships or vessels when notified of this act. Section 2. That during the continuance of this act no registered or sea letter vessel having on board goods, wares, or merchandise shall be allowed to depart from one port of the United States to any other within the same, unless the master, owner, consignee, or factor of such vessel shall first give bond with one or more sureties to the collector of the district from which she is bound to depart in a sum of double the value of the vessel and cargo, that the said goods, wares, or merchandise shall be relanded in some port of the United States. Dangers of the seas excepted, which bound, and also a certificate from the collector where the same may be relanded, shall be the collector respectively be transmitted to the Secretary of the Treasury. All vessels possessing public commissions from any foreign power are not to be considered as liable to the embargo laid by this act. The Non-Intercourse Act, March 1st, 1809. An act to interdict the commercial intercourse between the United States and Great Britain and France and their dependencies, and for other purposes. Be it enacted that from and after the passing of this act, the entrance of the harbors and waters of the United States and of the territories thereof be, and the same is hereby interdicted to all public ships and vessels belonging to Great Britain or France. And if any public ship or vessel, as aforesaid, not being included in the exception above mentioned, shall enter any harbor or waters within the jurisdiction of the United States or of the territories thereof, it shall be lawful for the President of the United States, or such other persons as shall have empowered for that purpose, to employ such part of the land and naval forces, or of the militia of the United States, or the territories thereof, as he shall deem necessary, to compel such ship or vessel to depart. Section 2. That it shall not be lawful for any citizen or citizens of the United States or the territories thereof, nor for any person or persons residing or being in the same, to have any intercourse with or to avoid any aid or supplies to any public ship or vessel as aforesaid, which shall, contrary to the provisions of this act, have entered any harbor or waters within the jurisdiction of the United States or the territories thereof. And if any person shall, contrary to the provisions of this act, have any intercourse with such ship or vessel, or shall afford any aid to such ship or vessel, either in repairing the said vessel or in furnishing her officers and crew with supplies of any kind, or in any manner whatsoever, every person so offending shall forfeit and pay a sum not less than $100, not exceeding $10,000, and shall also be imprisoned for a term not less than 1 month, nor more than 1 year. Section 3. That from and after the 20th day of May next, the entrance of the harbors and waters of the United States and their territories thereof be, and the same is hereby interdicted to all ships or vessels sailing under the flag of Great Britain or France, or owned in whole or in part by any citizen or subject of either. And if any ship or vessel sailing under the flag of Great Britain or France shall after the said 20th day of May next arrive either with or without a cargo within the limits of the United States or of the territories thereof, such ship or vessel, together with the cargo, if any, which may be found on board, shall be forfeited, and may be seized and condemned in any court of the United States or the territories thereof, having competent jurisdiction. Section 4. That from and after the 20th day of May next, it shall not be lawful to import into the United States or the territories thereof any goods, wares, or merchandise whatever from any port or place situated in Great Britain or Ireland, or in any of the colonies of the dependencies of Great Britain, nor from any port or place situated in France or in any of her colonies or dependencies, nor from any port or place in the actual possession of either Great Britain or France, nor shall it be lawful to import into the United States or the territories thereof any foreign port or place whatever, any goods, wares, or merchandise whatever, being of the growth, produce, or manufacture of France, or of any of her colonies or dependencies, or being of the growth, produce, or manufacture of Great Britain or Ireland, or of any of the colonies or dependencies of Great Britain, or being of the growth, produce, or manufacture of any place or country in the actual possession of either France or Great Britain. Section 11. That the President of the United States be, and hereby is authorized, in case either France or Great Britain so shall revoke or modify her edicts, as that they shall cease to violate the neutral commerce of the United States, to declare the same by proclamation, after which the trade of the United States, suspended by this act and by the Embargo Act and the several acts supplementary thereto, may be renewed with the nation so doing. Section 12. That so much of the Embargo Act and of the several acts supplementary thereto as forbids the departure of vessels owned by citizens of the United States and the exportation of domestic and foreign merchandise to any foreign port or place be and the same is hereby repealed after March 15, 1809, except so far as they relate to Great Britain or France, or their colonies or dependencies, or places in the actual possession of either. Section 19. That this act shall continue and be in force until the end of the next session of Congress, and no longer, and that the act laying an embargo on all ships and vessels in the ports and harbors of the United States, and the several acts supplementary thereto shall be, and the same are hereby repealed from and after the end of the next session of Congress. Macon's Bill No. 2. An act concerning the commercial intercourse between the United States and Great Britain and France and their dependencies, and for other purposes, being enacted, that from and after the passage of this act no British or French armed vessel shall be permitted to enter the harbors or waters under the jurisdiction of the United States, except when they shall be forced in by distress, or when charged with dispatches or businesses from their government, or coming as a public packet for the conveyance of letters. Section 2. That all pacific intercourse with any interdicted foreign armed vessels, the officers or crew thereof, is hereby forbidden. Section 4. That in case either Great Britain or France shall, before the 3rd day of March next, so revoke or modify her edicts as they shall cease to violate the neutral commerce of the United States, which fact the President of the United States should declare by proclamation, and if other nations shall not within 3 months thereafter so revoke or modify her edicts in the like manner, then the 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and 18th sections of the Act entitled An Act to Interdict the Commercial Intercourse between the United States and Great Britain and France shall from and after the expiration of 3 months from the date of the proclamation aforesaid be revived and have full force and effect so far as relates to the dominions, colonies, and dependencies, and to the articles, the growth, produce, or manufacture of the dominions, colonies, and dependencies of the nation, thus refusing or neglecting to revoke or modify her edicts in the manner aforesaid. And the restrictions imposed by this act shall, from the date of such proclamation, cease and be discontinued in relation to the nation revoking or modifying her decrees in the manner aforesaid. The Rambouillet Decree, March 23, 1810. Napoleon, etc. Considering that the government of the United States, by an act dated 1st March 1809, which forbids the entrance of the ports, harbors, and rivers of the said states to all French vessels, orders, first, that after the 20th of May following, vessels under the French flag, which shall arrive in the United States, shall be seized and confiscated, as well as their cargoes. Second, that after the same epoch, no merchandise or produce, the growth or manufacture of France or her colonies, can be imported into the said states from any port or place whatsoever, under the penalty of seizure, confiscation, and a fine of 3 times the value of the merchandise. Third, that American vessels cannot go to any port of France, of her colonies or dependencies. We have decreed, and do decree, what follows. Article 1. All vessels navigating under the flag of the United States, or possessed, in whole or in part, of any citizen or subject of that power, which, counting from the 20th of May, 1809, have entered or shall enter into the ports of our empire or colonies or of the countries occupied by our arms shall be seized, and the product of the sales shall be deposited in the surplus fund, caisse de assortiment. There shall be expected from this regulation the vessels which shall be charged with dispatches, or with the commission of the government of the said states, and who shall not have either cargoes or merchandise on board. Napoleon. Thank you for joining us for our primary source today on the appendix. We will see you in the stacks.